All right, welcome to the show today, everyone. My guest today is Nate Checketts. He's the co-founder and CEO of Rhone apparel. Nate was feeling unfulfilled in his career and saw a gap in the premium men's activewear market, so he used his 2-hour daily work commute to start Rhone on the side. Fast forward today, and Rhone has raised over $20 million in funding and can be found in retail stores around the world. I wanted to bring Nate on the show to find out how he built up Rhone while juggling a full-time job and family, what he's learned from this journey so far, and what's next for him. So Nate, welcome to the show.
Thanks, James. I'm excited.
So I was wondering if we could just spend a little bit of time on your background and your story. Were you always entrepreneurial growing up?
You know, I wouldn't have ever called it entrepreneurial. I was kind of always I was always building things, always selling things. My parents loved to tell people stories about experiences of mine when I was just going out and being an entrepreneur, but really it was more I was trying to save up money to go and buy the latest gadget toy, whether that was selling candy to neighborhood kids or me and my brothers always set up lemonade stands. And then when I was 14, my mom said, "Hey, you need to help contribute some funds to your summer camps that you're doing, and you need to go essentially find some source of income." So I started mowing my neighbors' lawns, and I hated it. It was terrible. I'm sitting there thinking, there's no way for me to multiply myself, so I can't scale this up quickly. And then I thought about what I felt like I was naturally good at, and that was, basically playing with kids. I have, over 50 first cousins. I come from a very large family. I have 5 siblings. So I was like, I can teach kids how to play sports. So I had my mom drop me off at Little League soccer games in our town, and I started passing out flyers to parents. And I was like, I'm going to host my own summer camp. And I was an Eagle Scout. I was a Boy Scout. So I said I had my life-saving merit badge and, try to put every credential that I could possibly qualify for. And my mom had no idea exactly what I was doing, but then she started getting phone calls from other parents in the community saying, "Hey, I hear Nate's doing a summer camp. Can I send my kid?" And her and my dad sat me down. They were like, "Okay, now you've gone too far." But they were actually hugely supportive, and this camp ended up running for 8 years. My 2 younger brothers ended up taking it over after me. I bought my first car with the money that I made from the camp, and I even had enough money later in life that I had saved up to buy my wife's first engagement ring because I got married pretty young. So. I was always building and selling things. I didn't know that was being an entrepreneur, but turns out I guess that's what it was.
I love it. And yeah, that gives us a bit of a sense of who you are. So it's a cool story. And so how did you've showed these sort of entrepreneurial traits, even if that wasn't what you called it initially. So how did you end up actually getting a position working at the NFL? Maybe you could tell that story.
Yeah, so I mean, to call a spade, my dad worked in sports my whole life, and my brothers, I have 3 brothers, they all aspired to work in sports. I had honestly no desire. It's not that I don't love sports, I do. I loved playing them, but the idea of working in sports, it felt contrived a little bit for me. And I really loved technology. That was kind of like my first passion, was working in a kind of a fast evolving space. So in college, I wrote a business plan for a mobile software business that would allow customers at fast casual restaurants, so not sit-down casual restaurants, but not fast food, the kind of the in-between that is taken over, to order food from their cell phone using text-based messages, and then it would send a fax to the restaurant, print up, the restaurant would prepare it, and then they would hand it over. Now we have, in the US and I assume in Australia, Seamless Web and Grubhub and lots of different applications. At the time, we were really one of the only ones to be doing this on mobile phones. There weren't iPhone applications yet, so it was all natural language processing, kind of early forms of artificial intelligence. And long story short, we ran into such obstacles building that business because you have to grow the restaurants to be appealing to users, and you have to grow the users to be appealing to restaurants. And so then I kind of drew from my childhood experience of going to sports stadiums, and I thought, well, we could go to one of these stadiums, sign one restaurateur who usually operates the entire building, and now you have a captive audience of 20,000 people. And so we changed the technology to go after the sports stadium business. What we didn't anticipate with that area is that most of these stadiums were not equipped with cellular connectivity to allow fans to send messages. So people would get there, and especially with the rise of smartphones eating more and more data up, you couldn't even send a picture, let alone download an application, send through a message. And so we ended up packaging up that business, and I sold it to a National Football League team in the US called the San Francisco 49ers. And then I started advising them and advising a couple of other entities. And I ended up meeting up with one of the senior heads of the NFL, and he said, "Hey, your background's really interesting. Would you consider coming and working at the NFL?" And truthfully, I was like, you know what? No, this isn't really a good fit. I had sold my business. I had started consulting. I was working like a third of the hours I was as a startup founder and making 3 times as much money. As a startup founder, you're not making very much money, I'll tell you that much. And so I was like, why would I leave? And I called my dad up and I said, hey, I think the NFL just offered me a job. And he said, well, what'd you say? I was like, I just told him I didn't think it was the right fit for me. And he more or less told me I was an idiot. I think he used more words and not as harsh words as that, but said that I should call them back. And so I did, and ended up moving my family out to New York to take that job and to run the sponsorship strategy for the National Football League.
That's great. That's a cool story of how that came about. And so what was that experience like for you, going from doing your own companies? You sold this company, which is great, sort of doing the consulting, working for yourself, and then going to working for the NFL. How did you find that?
It was like black and white, stark difference. I was going to work in flip-flops and shorts and a t-shirt, and the NFL is a very formal place. The acronym that a lot of people say is, instead of the National Football League, it's the No Fun League. And part of that is, because you have a ton of lawyers who work there. So it is suit and tie. You show up early, you leave late. I was commuting into the city I moved to Connecticut, which is where I grew up, so it was comfortable for me. And then I would get on a train and go into Manhattan. I used to drive 10 minutes to my office, or sometimes I just go downstairs and work from home. So it was a huge change. And now, whenever I wanted to get anything done, it wasn't just go and do it. It was go through 3 levels of bureaucracy and red tape just to have the ability to start the work. And it was a challenge for me. I don't think it was my natural habitat, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, makes sense. And so is it fair to say you started to get itchy feet, I guess, and wanting to start something else? How long did it take for that to happen?
Yeah, I think it was the commute that really did me in. I mean, I was kind of like 3 or 4 months into the job, and I was riding the train, and I remember thinking, this is just miserable. Like, why am I doing this? And so, I think part of the challenge for me is that I was frustrated with not only the amount of time I was spending on a train, but I was also frustrated that I was spending so much time trying to convince people to let me do things that I knew were good for the company to begin with. And it's not to say that I didn't work with really talented, smart people. It's just that big companies are generally inefficient at getting things done. They don't move fast. They're like giant cruise ships. They know they need to turn left, but in order to make a left turn, you have to, change 18 things and then turn the rudder, and then eventually you get to turn left. And I had come from the world of a speedboat, where it's like turn left, now we're turning left. The moment you think it, the moment you're acting. And so I sat there on the train, and I felt guilty because, on the one hand, I felt like I should be happy. I have a job that I know many of my friends would love to have. This is, the greatest sports league in the U.S. and, really one of the primary jobs that one could have. I had stability for my family, which I didn't have in the startup world, and at that point, I had two children, and yet I felt really unfulfilled. And so, as I was on the train, I would always bring a journal or a notebook. I started writing in there, I want to build a brand that matters. And what I knew by that was I knew I wanted to be in a leadership role because I could affect the change that I wanted. I hope it wasn't because of arrogance or a need to be in charge, but just because I wanted to make an impact. And two, I wanted to do something that was meaningful, that if I wasn't there or I stepped away, there would be an impact. And the reality is at the NFL, if I disappeared, they had a stack of resumes that they could have fulfilled my job with. And so that's, as soon as I knew that, then I started kind of opening my mind and my ears to anything that could help me get there.
Yep, makes sense. So what was the opportunity you did see which did eventually lead to Rhone? Where did that idea come from?
Yeah, well, truthfully, it wasn't one that I did see. I mean, it started during a Christmas party. Like I said, I come from a large family, and my mom had gone out and gone shopping for everyone, and her gift to the kids every year is pajamas, and so she had gone to Lululemon, which was at the time I had heard of the brand, I was aware of it, but I knew my wife shopped there, but I wasn't terribly familiar with it. And so she brought me this pair of sweatpants, and I thought, wow, these are nice sweatpants. And my brother-in-law said to me, well, I'm not wearing that. This is a women's yoga brand. And I said, well, why not? Look at feel the fabric. The fabric feels different than, these other brands that we've been wearing all these years. And he goes, Nate, look at the logo. Look at the packaging. I would never wear these outside of the house. And I was like, well, I'm more comfortable in my skin than you are, so I don't care. And then I'm at work. This is a month later, and Budweiser, which was one of our big league sponsors, had sent a box of Lululemon gear for some of the women in the office. They were opening it up, talking about it. I was trying to communicate and participate in the conversation, still a fairly new employee there. And I said, hey, I've got a pair of Lululemon sweatpants. And it was like that record scratching moment where everybody stops and looks at you and is like, oh, what? And the guy next to me, my colleague next to me, is like, oh, that's cool. So you buy your underwear at Victoria's Secret, which, was the ultimate guy insult, in the walls in the NFL. And so I called my brother-in-law up and I was like, this is weird. You mentioned this and this guy mentioned it. And yet what these guys have done is they've built a vertical model to speak directly to consumers. And we were seeing the rise of direct-to-consumer businesses with Warby Parker and Bonobos and others. Said maybe there's a way to go and build a men's brand, but focused again directly on the consumer market and sell primarily online. And that's how the idea came about, and we just started playing around with it.
I love it. It's a cool origin story. So you started working on this initially on your commute to New York City from Connecticut. So 2 hours a day, that's a long commute, but it's not a lot of time to work on a business. So I was just wondering, how did you actually choose what to work on those initial stages with those constraints of the 2 hour commute each day?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I didn't think about at the time, but have thought about it in hindsight. My first company gave me a lot of experience to focus on the things that actually matter. And I made so many mistakes in building my first company where it was, I wanted our logo to be perfect, and I wanted my business card to be the right thickness, and I wanted the fonts to be right. And with Rhone, I didn't think about that at all, because all of those things, they feel really important to you because they're personal, but they're mostly a waste of time until the right moment. And really for us, we just needed to focus on one thing and one thing only. could we make beautiful product? Because if we couldn't do that, nothing else really mattered. And once we figured out whether we were able to do that, could we then sell the product? Because the reality is in today's world, you can make just about anything, but can you sell it is by far the bigger question. Now, neither me nor my brother-in-law came from the world of fashion or the world of e-commerce or the world of, kind of building consumer brands. I'd been an entrepreneur, but not really in terms of like this market. So, I always tell people we had no business doing this other than we had an idea, we were really committed to it, and we focused on the highest, best priority of our time, which was let's see if we can make the best product possible. Let's keep detailed notes about our own activity. We were both very active. And then from there, then let's go and build a brand and see if we can sell it.
That's great. So how did you actually get traction initially with that? Did you have a specific strategy around launching the brand that saw you get initial success with it?
Our initial strategy was just talk to everyone that we know. And I mean, everyone. James, every time I got on an airplane, I had these like Rhone pass-along cards is what I would call them. And we hadn't even launched yet. We had this site that if you went to it, it was just saying like something, I can't even remember what it said, but it was like something big is coming into your email to find out more. And so I would have a goal every time I would travel for work or I'd get on the train and I would say, I'm going to give out 5 of these cards. And I would also email this gigantic family that I have and say, hey, go and sign up. And I can't remember how many emails we had when we launched, but I think it was close to 5,000 real organic emails that we had gone just from talking to people. Wow. And so the day we launched, it was really friends and family, and the feedback was immediate. Everybody came in and bought. And in the first 2 months, we did about $80,000 in sales with, call it there was zero advertising dollars outside of just kind of a 6-month buildup of going and talking to people and collecting email addresses. And, then from there, it really grew and expanded.
Yeah, that's amazing. It really is a lot of the times that hand-to-hand combat at the start. People are looking for the algorithm or the way to automate that stuff, but sometimes you do have to get your hands dirty and do the hand-to-hand combat. So it's great.
Yeah, I always tell people, even though we're making more and more online transactions and the transaction is happening digitally, we're still determining what to buy based on what we experience in real life. So this idea, it's such a millennial term to be like online, offline. But the truth is like we're transacting online, but it's, I don't know, at least my own experience, I'm much more largely influenced by what I experience in my own life, what a friend's wearing, what a colleague's wearing, what I see on a billboard or I see in a store display. Yes, digital advertising absolutely works. Instagram, Facebook, it's where we spend a lot of our dollars. But I think what works really well in combination is when you're doing real life activations and when you're getting good, great quality product on people. And then it's like, you put the fire, you put gasoline on this fire, and then you're lighting the flame.
Yeah, makes total sense. So how long was it before you actually left the NFL and started working on this full time outside of your train commute? Yeah. Well, so we kind of did this soft launch in November of 2013, and it was going on the side, and I was still just like, we had no full-time employees. The company was making a little bit of revenue every month. Like I said, I think we did 80,000 in the first 2 months, but I was terrified. I was terrified to leave my like safety net of 401k plan and retirement and all the benefits, healthcare that a great corporate job affords. And then it became kind of undeniable. I saw that the company was growing and scaling, and every time I spent time on it, I also felt more fulfilled and more excited and more energized. And so by fall of 2014, I was like, okay,
I looked at my brother-in-law. I said, one of us needs to go run this. We either need to hire someone or one of us needs to go run this, because right now we're neglecting it and we're not giving it the opportunity to be as successful as it can be. And I remember him looking at me and him saying, well, it's got to be you. He had spent most of his time in the finance world and so had far less operational experience. And I had to get my wife on board with going back to the startup route, but she, to her credit, she was amazing and supported me. And now 5 years later, we've had an exciting run.
Yeah, that's great. So you sort of largely started as a direct-to-consumer brand, but now you do sell in retail stores. So was that kind of your plan all along? Sort of start as online only, direct-to-consumer, and then expand out? Or was that something that evolved?
Now, that was definitely an evolutionary thinking process. I mean, I think what we had believed, our hypothesis was that everybody's going to move to direct-to-consumer. This idea that 100 years ago, if you were living in the world then, you would buy your meat at the local butcher, you'd buy your bread at the local baker, and you'd buy your produce at the local produce stand. And then everything went mass, and buying a month's worth of groceries in one place, and your clothing from whoever. And now I think it is going more local again, but it's not local based on geography. It's local based on kind of interest parameters. So if you're a highly engaged runner, you might be looking for a very running specific brand, the right fabrics. And so our belief was that direct-to-consumer was going to be the future. But what we didn't fully anticipate was when I went out and I started speaking to the founder of Warby Parker and the founder of Bonobos, is they said, if I could do this all over again, I would go to wholesale much earlier. Just be very selective about the wholesale partners that you work with. And so that made me start thinking. And as I came over to the business full time, I ended up meeting this woman who is now our head of sales. She had worked for Seven for All Mankind, a premium denim business, and then worked for Joe's Jeans. And she said, "Oh, I think Bloomingdale's would buy this in a heartbeat." And I was like, I had just come out of these conversations. I was like, well, let's go see if we can get them. Let's go see if we can get them to buy it. And they did. They put us in 5 doors, and then we got Equinox on board, and now we're Equinox's #1 men's brand. We passed Lululemon and passed Nike. For the non-US listeners, Equinox is the #1 premium health and fitness club in the US, over 100 locations now. And places like Barry's Boot Camp and Nordstrom. We're now in 80 doors with Nordstrom. So we've the Peloton, we're Peloton's #1 men's brand. So we've had a lot of growth on that side, but the vast majority of the business is still direct to consumer through our website.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so just taking that opportunity when it comes up makes total sense. And so you have raised money for the business. So I was wondering if you could maybe just share, you got any advice for people who are thinking about raising money from investors? When is it a good idea to do that or not do that? And just anything that they need to keep in mind that you've maybe learned from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, raising money is tough. And in fact, I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel like that becomes their primary job, is raising money. And it's, it can be a gigantic distraction from actually doing the business. And I would, this might feel like speaking out of both sides of my mouth for a bit, but let me kind of try and get into it. I would say try and do as much as you can with as little as you can early on. And what I mean by that is go and try and create as much value without having to take outside capital. Bringing in outside capital brings all kinds of challenges to it. One, there's a question around control. How much control do you continue to keep in the business? And two, now you have all this outside influence and voices of people that aren't in the business day to day, but feel like they're experts. And they might be experts in certain categories, but nobody's as much of an expert in your business as you are. So I think what I always encourage entrepreneurs to do is to say, hey, how are you creating value, not just thinking about raising money? Because by the way, an investor is not really going to want to get behind you unless there is value. And that value could be in your experience, stuff that you've done before. It could be going to potential folks and saying, hey, I don't have this product yet, but if I were to make this product this way, would you buy it? And signing non-binding letters of intent. Um, and then you can go to an investor and you can say, here's the work that I've done. Because an investor wants to see that you've done the work without him or her needing to write a check. Because if you're not willing to do the work without a check, you're definitely not going to do the work once you have a check. And so a lot of people think they can't create value without raising money, and that's just wrong. You absolutely can create value. You just need to be more creative if you can't think of ways.
Yep. I love that. Focus on creating value, not just raising money. Makes total sense. Awesome. Well, sort of coming off towards the tail end of the interview here, Nate, but one thing I did want to ask you about quickly was, I guess, just what's coming up next for you, both with Rhone and then if there's anything else happening as well. I believe you're starting to train for a marathon coming up this year. Maybe you could just talk about what's coming up next for you.
Yeah. So, we at Rhone, we're expanding our product set. So we started really in the activewear space, but we've expanded into what we call this performance lifestyle space. So we launched the commuter pant and polos and really more lifestyle pieces infused with performance fabrics. And so we're continuing to spend more and more time on that category. It's doing incredibly well for us. We launched a dress shirt I'm telling you, this dress shirt is like such a game changer. It's this Italian knit fabric. It's made on this machine that uses over 4,000 needles. It's the softest dress shirt you've ever put on. And then when you wear it, your own body's heat actually makes the wrinkles disappear. So you feel like you're cheating when you wear it. You see all these other people and stuff eat cotton dress shirts, and you're like, oh man, you have no idea how much more comfortable I am than you. So that's what's next for Rhone, and we're also opening a few more retail stores. We've got 4 today, building out the team. There's so much going on. I feel like I can barely keep my eyes open sometimes. And then on the personal side, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes about 11 years ago. 11 years ago this July. And recently I became the chairman of an organization called Beyond Type 1, which is the fastest growing nonprofit in the diabetes space. Nick Jonas is on the board with me, and they asked me if I would be willing to captain the New York Marathon team this fall. So we're raising money. If any of the James Harrison listeners want to donate, we would appreciate it. Diabetes it can be a very difficult, crippling disease. A lot of highs and lows. It predominantly impacts young children. That's when they're diagnosed. I was diagnosed much later in life, so I was lucky that way. And there are a lot of people that go undiagnosed and end up losing their life. So we're trying to provide awareness. Some levels of kind of treatment and better care, and mostly we're trying to provide a community where people can come together and talk about their challenges and treatment plans. And it is a curable disease, so we are on a path to a cure, and I'm very, very passionate about it.
Yeah, it's a great mission, and absolutely after this call I'll get a direct link from you to where people can contribute. Should they wish to, and I would definitely encourage people to. So,
thank you. And honestly, any amount, I know people say that, but I really truly appreciate anything that anyone does.
Awesome. Well, Nate, is there anything that I haven't asked you, or just anything you really want to make sure you pass on to the audience before we finish up here?
No, I mean, just wait for us, and for the Australian listeners, wait for us. We're coming eventually, and I think I love that part of the world. One of my favorite parts of the world, and just very honored to be on the show, and appreciate you taking the time to interview me.
Awesome, and thank you for your time as well. And last question is just, what's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to check out Rhone? Or check out some of your other personal channels? What's the best way?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. If I'm active on any social media, it would be Instagram and probably LinkedIn to a degree. And yeah, shoot me a message. I mean, I think that might be how you and I connected. I can't remember. Uh, and yeah, come follow us at Rhone and shop us online.
Awesome. I'll make sure I link up all your relevant links in the show notes, Nate. But yeah, thank you very much for taking the time out today. You're a very busy guy. You've got a lot going on, as you said, and so I appreciate you making a bit of time to share your journey and the things you've learned building up Rhone over the last years. So thank you very much for your time.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this interview with Nate. If you use Apple Podcasts, got a quick favor to ask. Can you please go into the app and leave my show a rating and a review? And the reason for that is that it just really helps out with the show ranking, helps more people discover these interviews, and helps me to be able to keep presenting this content. And if you don't use Apple Podcasts, you can still help me out. Just take a screenshot of yourself listening to this interview, go onto Instagram, post that screenshot to your Instagram story, tag me at jharris, JHARRISS, tag Nate as well, Nate Checketts and Rhone, and I'll link up those profiles in the show notes. And if you do any of those two things, it would really help me out. Thanks a lot.